I can tell you that you do not have a learning problem, even if you were in later life with constant brain fog. What you might have is an application problem. That's the gap between what you know and what you do. And that gap is not filled by more information. It's got to be filled by a deliberate loop. And that's the application loop. Thank you for listening to Routine is Revenue, your place to build routines and bank results. I'm Ildiko Seely, your routine and performance strategist, keen to close the gap between what business owners learn and what they actually put into practice. This episode is for you if you consume a lot. You might even call yourself a learning junkie, but feel like very little of it is actually changing how you work. And if you're ready to learn less and apply more, well, let's go. In this routine reset, we look at application loops. And that is the deliberate practice of turning learning into action before moving on to the next thing. It's the difference between information that sits in a notebook and the knowledge that changes how you operate. Now, there are probably 8,000 valuable things I've learned and I did nothing with for months. And I'm now dead certain that you associate with that too. Sometimes I would find my notes again later and think, I knew that. I just never did anything with it. And to be honest, I don't think that my discipline failed here, but it was my learning system that certainly did. So while I advocate habit stacking, like an audiobook here, an online webinar over lunch there, a podcast on the commute, just please be aware of the danger that this way of learning can create a cycle of consumption without integration. Because you take in something useful, and in the moment you feel the benefit of the insight, but then you move on so quickly to the next thing before you actually change anything in your work practices. The problem is that the result is that the feeling of learning will just become a substitute for the result of learning. So as we covered in Routine Reset 3 on intentional learning, attention works best when it's directed. So application loops take that one step further because not only do you choose what you learn, you stay with it until it actually changes something in how you work. So without that loop, learning is just constant. And come on, I'm sure that you already have enough content in your head. So let's have a look. The application loop works like this. You learn something. You identify the one action that it calls for. You take the action, and then you review what changed. Then and only then you move on to the next thing. Yeah? So the key is this cycle. You take learning, you put it into action, and then you review. And then you can learn again. Because without it, you don't know whether the learning has actually worked, so you cannot build on it. But with the review built into that cycle, each piece of learning just compounds nicely into the next. So the structure that makes this work is a dedicated session. Ideally, the same time every week maybe, where learning and application happen together. Or you just tag an implementation session on the back of a webinar. But this would actually turn passive learning into active doing. The good example is a workbook chapter that is completed before the next one is opened. Or maybe when an insight is turned into a process change before the next insight is sought actively. So as you can see, but I'm not suggesting that you slow down your learning process, but rather making sure that whatever you learn actually sticks, and that will shape how you work. Because rather than you're just going to fill up the space between the tasks, you can implement. And if you want to hear this explored from a different angle, I had an interview with Paul Andrew, and we talked about this in last week's episode. And the way he applies learning loops in his own practice and teaching is well worth a listen. Now, from my point of view, there's a book called $1 Million Action by Rachel Rogers. It's actually a workbook paired with her reading book, We Should All Be Millionaires. And every chapter ends with a graduation checklist, which means that everything must be completed before you move on to the next one. So currently, I'm probably about halfway through because I'm not rushing. I'm just doing the work, completing each loop before moving on. But something else happened. Sadly, as my workloads have changed in the recent few months, I lost the dedicated Monday morning session that I had allocated to it. And as it happens, once that time slot disappeared, I never reinstated it in another day. So that learning loop broke for me. And that is a real honest lesson here, that an application loop is only as strong as the structure that holds it. And where that structure goes, yeah, you guessed it, the loop goes with it. So please protect your time. Because what happens if the consumption continues without that loop? You keep learning. You might even call yourself a learning junkie. It's not funny either. But then you've got countless notebooks that have filled up. So your library is going to grow. Brilliant. But when do you realize that your business continues to operate much the same way as it did before? Because over time, there is a much more subtle cost. And that is the growing gap between what you know and what you do. And it will start feeling like a personal failure rather than a system problem. And then there comes a point when you begin to wonder why things are not changing despite how much you are investing in yourself. But you see, the answer is really clear when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Because when you step out of the jar and read the label on your jar, you realize that you really don't need more learning. You just need to close the loop on what you already know. I'm sorry if I sound a little bit preachy, but just have a little think. When do you actually stop accumulating knowledge and start applying it? It shouldn't be just at the end of a course or when you finish a book. But now, when you take one thing and you close one loop, even halfway through a book or halfway through that course, make this the one change to how you operate this week. And if this has highlighted a pattern that you recognize, your next step is simple. I'm leading the routine revolution with my 52 to 52 campaign, but I'm offering one complimentary routine audit conversation every week. These hour-long conversations include looking at how you learn and whether it's actually moving your business forward. So please visit routinerevolution.co.uk to register your interest, because spaces are being taken up by others already. And for now, apply before you move on. And that is exactly where the value lives. So look after your intellectual health, and remember, a healthier you makes a wealthier you.